We're just basically talking about freedom tech in general and not just Bitcoin. And our next guest that's going to come up here and talk, Jeff Gardner, is, in my opinion, just such a respected engineer in this space. And what he's about to show you is beyond exciting. Everybody in here is familiar with Signal. Everybody in here is familiar with what the mission or what supposedly Signal is supposed to represent, which is a decentralized, fully encrypted communications channel between two different parties. Whether that's true or not, I can't audit the code. I can't tell you whether that's what is actually happening in the background. And with Nostr, with a lot of the technology that Bitcoin has incentivized, that where Nostr really kind of evolved from, which is this decentralized communication layer and identity layer. You got Jeff, who's building what could potentially be the next Signal in a very decentralized kind of way. So it is my honor and pleasure to bring Jeff up here, very talented engineer, to talk about this idea.
Thank you, sir. That was very kind. Okay, cool. So this is a little bit of a black pill talk for the first little bit, but stick with me. It will get a little less black pilly by the time we finish up. So the product that I'm working on is kind of two parts. There's a protocol and kind of encryption standard and a bunch of libraries underneath, but the thing that we're building on top of that is an app called White Noise. And we are building white noise for the dark times that we live in. And make no mistake, these are definitely dark times. We have been seeing the number of liberal democracies across the world in decline for the last 19 years straight. It's now at the lowest level it's been in the last 50 years. We know that 72% of the world's population lives under authoritarian rulers right now. That is climbing still. And only about 17% of the world has actual free, unfettered access, unrestricted access to the internet. And we know that these times are getting darker. We are not turning this around anytime soon. We have laws like EU's chat control. We have the Online Safety Act in the UK. We have the UN Convention on Digital Cybercrime, which is basically just more surveillance. And all of these laws are increasing in pace and in speed. You know, you can't even use tools like Spotify in the UK now without scanning your face and sending them your passport, your government-issued ID. We know that as well. There's many governments around the world that are putting CBDCs into place, putting digital IDs into place. We know China has social credit scores that they use against their citizenry regularly. And in so-called Western free democracies, we have companies like Facebook, like Google, like OpenAI that are tracking as much data as they can get about you in order to profile you, to sell you more crap you don't need. I actually went into a family WhatsApp group there recently and tried to turn off AI's meta feature, and I noticed that it's actually bundled with being able to save photos back to your camera roll. So if you want to turn off AI's spyware, or Meta's spyware in there, you actually have to make it so that the group becomes super less useful for, you know, your grandparents or your parents. So it's things like these that are contributing to the fact that these dark times are not getting any better anytime soon. And what this all comes back to is centralized control. We have ended up in a place where we have outsourced all of our thinking and all of our responsibility to highly centralized entities. And this has been done mostly under the guise of this false dilemma that it's either security or privacy. It's either a functioning system with convenience and ease of use, or it's privacy. That you can't have both of these things together. And so we have given them kill switches, we've given them these choke points, and they love these choke points. They send all your data through systems that they control so that they can both store it, track it, use it to profile you, but also to stop it whenever they want. And so we have pretty much given them the keys to the castle. And I think everybody in this room would agree with the statement that you cannot have real liberty, real freedom without privacy. You know, this is not just a cypherpunk ideal. John Locke wrote about this in the late 1600s. It has been a very well-documented, well-understood fact about how humans work. We have to have the ability to have our own private thoughts. We have to have the ability to discuss hard topics, sometimes really uncomfortable topics. We have to be able to push back on authority if we want to have any sort of progress that is meaningful and in a direction that actually benefits humans rather than destroys them. So I think that we need to really protect, I mean, Bitcoin has done an amazing job at giving us the ability to have free transactions or have protected transactions that are very censorship resistant. We can now carry our money without any intermediaries. But we are very rapidly losing the ability to talk to each other or to talk in groups in that same way. And so to me, private comms is the most important thing that we can work on right now if we want to protect free speech and free assembly, which then gives us the ability to protect many of our other rights. And today's tools fail us, right? Like, we know this. Like, this is, I won't beat the dead horse forever on this one, but you know, today's tools do not serve the users. We had this very weird quirk in the early internet. If you go back and look at the original HTTP spec, you know, the specification that basically defined how the internet works, there is this status code, 402, that says, you know, pay me, basically. You know, you would hit a website, and instead of sending you the content, or a 404, which would mean, you know, no content found, it sends you a 402 and says, pay me for this before I'm going to show it to you. But it never got implemented because we never had the ability to do proper microtransactions in a digital space in the correct way. And so we ended up with Visa and MasterCard and Stripe and Meta and Google and a system that was basically immediately going decentralized to a handful of monopolistic huge players. Social media did not help this at all. You know, we ended up with some very large tech companies. We ended up with the very beginnings of the cloud. Social media has driven us into much more polarized scenarios than we might have otherwise been in. We all know this. The research is absolutely clear. These algorithms are not serving us. They're not serving the public discourse. They are serving ads. That's it. That is their entire goal, and they are extremely, extremely good at it. And artificial intelligence, to me, is, I mean, on one side, it's the most incredible technology I've used personally in a very, very long time. Anybody in here that programs or has to write large quantities of text or has to just do basic research on things knows that this is absolutely life-changing technology. However, using it in a convenient, fast, easy, cheap way is also feeding all that machine, that monster, with all of your data, continuing to give it more and more and more about you. I heard something recently, I think it was Kale actually who pointed this out, that Google and Facebook did a bunch of research. I think this was specifically as Facebook. They did a load of research where they can tell you more about you than, you know, survey data that you would fill out about yourself by how your mouse moves, by how you use the site, by how you click on things, by whether you double click or triple click on stuff when you're in a rush. They could profile and understand more about you and identify you out of a crowd of people with data that's that simple. So now hand them, you know, multiple football fields worth of GPUs and hundreds or billions of dollars to train these incredibly complex, incredibly intelligent models with, and they're going to do it. And the people that are going to suffer is going to be all of us. So how do we fix this? To me, there's only one way to get back out of this, and it's that we need to go back to open protocols. The beginning of technology was all about open protocols. The beginning of the internet was an open protocol. Email, an open protocol again. And all of these things over time have been co-opted simply for convenience. We've basically handed off all of our agency in return for a more convenient way to use the internet, technology, and go through our lives. And I do understand that, like, that makes total sense. People are busy, you've got kids, you've got work, you've got things that you're rushing around to. I understand that this is a reasonable trade-off for most people. But in aggregate, I think we have to pause and think about this a little bit more and make a hard choice and say, no, we're actually going to do the harder thing because it's the right thing to do. And this is where, you know, Nostr gets really exciting for me, because Nostr is a completely open protocol that's incredibly simple. You know, you can read the entire required part of the spec in about 20 minutes. You can understand and have a working app up and running in probably less than 10 minutes with an LLM now. And that gives us a really good way to get a very healthy, very large developer base building incredibly exciting technology that is completely open. So what do I mean by open? First off, I think it's really important that we get rid of these intermediaries as much as possible. Bitcoiners understand this, right? Like, we don't want trusted third parties in the middle. We want to minimize trust as much as possible. Nostr obviously doesn't get rid of all intermediaries. It is not a peer-to-peer protocol. Nostr has an array of relays in the middle. And those relays, while you are trusting them with the data that you're sending them, the trope that we have in Nostr is smart clients, dumb relays. We want the servers to be really, really stupid. We want them to do two things: accept messages and store them, and reply with messages when they're asked. That's it. We don't expect them to do any processing on them. We don't expect them to do any sort of stat calculation or anything like that. And I think that's really important, because we want to have the middlemen be as replaceable as possible. We are happy to give them data where it makes sense and in the right ways, but we want to be able to turn them off at any point and turn around to another provider in the middle and not have any sort of disruption to the service that we have. So that's the first one. We need to minimize the intermediaries that we have, and we need to very, very strictly define what we expect from them and how replaceable they are. Another thing that's really cool about Nostr is user-owned identity. You could, like my friend Max says, you can lock yourself in a bathroom with a pair of dice and create a Nostr identity. It is just a Schnorr key pair, just like a Bitcoin address. You get a public key, you get a private key. Now, unlike a Bitcoin address, you can't move your identity, so it's a little bit trickier. But user-owned identity is something that we've barely scratched the surface of. You know, when you give someone Nostr for the first time, you sign them up for Primal or Damus, they use an app that looks like Twitter, they're there shitposting, they're getting zaps, they're enjoying it, and then you take that exact same key and turn around and plug it into a messenger app, and they see their entire follow graph come with them, and they know exactly who they can connect to and talk to without having to do any extra work. For most people, that's kind of a magic moment. And that's kind of the very beginning of that track. You know, we have Cashew wallets that are stored on Nostr relays in an encrypted way so that your money follows you around through Nostr as well. There's all sorts of things we can do with this that I think get really, really exciting when this network gets really big. Like I already said, relay choice is huge, and that relay choice plus user-owned identity means that Nostr is very censorship resistant. You can take your identity, you can move to a different client. If the client disappears, no big deal, just pick another one, or fork it and build your own. If the relay disappears, no big deal, just use some more. If the relay starts acting weird or starts being not a good actor in the space, stop using it. It's as simple as that. And these relays, again, are very, very simple pieces of software. They're like basically databases. You can run one on your phone, you can run one on your laptop, you can run one on a server somewhere in the cloud. So that brings us to the stuff that I've been working on for the last while. So Nostr in its early form was really meant to be a fix for social media. The original spec and the original doc that Fiat Jaff, the creator of Nostr, wrote goes into detail about how to fix effectively Twitter and the problems that Twitter had. It really didn't have an idea of how to do private communications at all. And it wasn't until a few months into the project that Ben Ark actually created the first kind of attempt at how we were going to do private messaging. And it was a very naive attempt. It wasn't meant to be super secure. It was just literally, let's try and see if we can make this work. It was quite bad, to be honest. It leaked all metadata about who was talking to who and when. It encrypted the content of the messages, but again, because we're using public relays, we are sending messages with encrypted content, but has all the metadata around it directly to the relays. So very quickly, people built bots that would basically just report on who was talking to who in the public, discourse in Nostr, which is a great way to get some, solutions in place really quickly. And quite a few other developers started working on a kind of second version of encryption or direct messaging on Nostr. And that second version was a lot better. It used a much more robust version of encryption for the content, and it wrapped the message in another message that hid who was actually talking to who. So you're able now to send messages to another user. No one knows who sent that message to you. No one knows what the content of the message is. And that obviously is a really big step up. That makes things a lot better. But the encryption on that system is based on a Diffie-Hellman between your keys and the other party's keys, which means that if someone's key leaks, then all the past conversations are decryptable and all the conversation going forward into the future is decryptable. This is what we call double ratchet, or post-compromise security and forward secrecy. And that was the major thing that the Signal protocol gave the world. The Signal protocol was the first protocol to figure out how to do both of those things with this ratcheting system. And ratcheting is basically just they change the keys in different ways for different parts of the system at different times in order that an attacker, if they got a key, can't go backwards and they can't go forwards. They might get one message, but that's going to be it. So Signal is a great protocol. And actually, to Preston's earlier point, I think Signal is actually a great actor. I think the CEO, Meredith, is pretty honest. I think they really do try to minimize the amount of metadata that they have on their users, and they do their absolute best to not give that data to any government officials. But they're still a US foundation, and they still have a CEO, and they still have $50 million worth of servers that they have to run every year. So there's a lot of risk there in the fact that anybody could come and take down Signal. I mean, the US government could show up tomorrow, black bag Meredith, shut down the foundation, and the Signal that we all have access to would simply cease to exist. So we need something more robust if we actually want to have private communications that are durable in an adversarial environment like we have. So MLS is an internet standard. It was kind of granted that status in July of 2023, so it's very new. It's an evolution of the Signal protocol that kind of reorients how groups are structured. And I won't go into the technical details. I'm happy to talk about that with anybody that wants to later, but the basic gist is it takes something that is very, that scales very badly from a computer science point of view and turns it into something that scales way, way better. In Signal, if you have a group, you're basically encrypting every time to every member of the group separately. In MLS, you don't do that. And MLS, in that regard, is, in my opinion, going to become the kind of de facto standard of secure messaging across the internet. However, it was mostly designed for a centralized world. And so the MLS protocol doesn't really think about how you do identity, and it doesn't really think about how you do delivery of messages. It sort of assumes you're going to have a big server that's going to give you all that information. And when I talked to the guys who wrote one of the implementations, the one that I use for the MLS protocol, and asked them, told them what I was trying to do, they went, okay, good luck. We haven't seen one working yet, but let us know if we can help. And so I knew that, I didn't have to do the hard cryptography. That was done by the MLS protocol. But figuring out how to apply that cryptography to Nostr's very unique characteristics was what I spent most of my time over the last year on. So White Noise is the app that is building MLS encryption into Nostr. And the way we do that is we create groups. You use your Nostr public key only as an identifier. And so you already have your entire network of Nostr followers and all of that, knowing who you're talking to. That goes into these groups. That identity, that your pub key in Nostr, isn't part of what you sign messages with. And so if your pub key or your private key on Nostr were ever to leak, those groups are completely inaccessible to the attacker. And similarly, if any of the keys from your MLS group leak, just like Signal, they might get access to one small part of a conversation, but they're not going to get access in a continuing manner forward or backwards to that conversation. And interestingly, because of how Nostr's relay system works, we get an even better scalability in this because you only have to send a single message to relays when you want to send a group a message. And everybody in the group knows how to go and find that message, but there's absolutely no metadata about who's in the group, how many people are in the group, who sent the message. There are very specific ways that we've done this to make sure that we're not letting any metadata get out of the conversation other than a single identifier that can be rotated on a really regular basis. So White Noise is the project that we've been working on. It has been released. It's very, very early. It's very buggy. I will definitely put my hands up and say that. But we feel really confident in the underlying technology and in the protocol that I wrote for how to apply this MLS stuff to Nostr. And I think this gives us the ability to have properly secure communications going forward in a way that no one will be able to turn off, and in a way that will be completely interoperable across the entire Nostr ecosystem. So just like if you don't like Primal and you want to change to a different client, you just take your key and go somewhere else, you'll be able to actually just log in to a different MLS client if you don't like White Noise, and you'll be able to join groups that you're already in, and then stop using the other client, stop using white noise if you'd like. And I think that, again, is a really important part. We don't want to have intermediaries, not even me. You don't want intermediaries in the middle that you can't replace. And that goes for clients, that goes for servers, that goes for governments, that goes for politicians, it goes for all of them. Okay, I'll stop there. That's the link to go check out the website if you want. Go join the TestFlight, go join Android, hit me up with a load of messages about what's broken. We are working on fixing them as fast as we possibly can. And I think I've got about a minute left, so if there's a question or two that people want to ask, I'm down to answer them. Thank you.